Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Well, happy Wednesday, everybody. This is Rich Scheben from Montana, sitting in for Vincent Finelli and for Guineith Isaacs. And as most of you know, Guineith Isaacs had an accident with a horse while riding in Australia. And Guineith, we all wish you well. And for those of you who want to write a note to Guineith for well wishes, I suggest you send an email to Vincent at it's just instructor@USAPrepares.com. That's instructor@USAPrepares.com. And I want to thank Jason for engineering the broadcast in Minnesota. And I am going to just go off into tangents today. I'm going to talk some gardening. I'm going to talk some off-grid type living, things that you need, the materials, the tools, to give you a little homework before, so you know what to look for and what to read and research and investigate. I'm going to talk about up-to-date news. And I'm sure I'm going to go off into tangents, and I never have enough time to say all the things I wanted to say, so I'm just going to start right now. There's an article here. Let's just start with the news. Let's just do that. There's apparently anti-Trump people on the Democrat side that says it's nearly impossible to deprogram millions of Trump supporters. And you know what? It's going to be hard not going off into tangents with comments when I hear this stuff, because when I give comments, I got to tell you, I know there's a lot of disappointment with people who have been listening to some people on the alternative media who claim that they had predictions, they had crystal balls about the way things were going to happen. They speculate. They hedge their bets. They often guess, sometimes with the glass half full, with not enough facts to back it up. Now, there was plenty of facts regarding election fraud, but I personally like objective facts. I like practical experience. I don't like theory. I don't like subjective emotional opinion. I like connecting the dots with real facts, with a plan. And we often have people who take the ball, take the microphone, and they make predictions so when they're right, they can get a name for themselves. But we have to realize, people, there's a lot of people all over, not just the left media, that's obvious, but even some people, it could be like intelligence agencies people creating psyops. We've talked about the psyops and how they go after your ego many times. A lot of it's propaganda, hoaxes, false flags, lies, gaslighting. A lot of it is entrapment plans to catch patriots, to actually catch people that love and respect their country. And if you notice these things, you're called, guess what? A conspiracy theorist. Or a racist, bigot, sexist, misogynist, homophobe, intolerant, violent hater. In other words, anti-Islamist phobe. So a lot of people, even in the mainstream media, especially big names, they're afraid to say a lot of truths because they care more about their jobs than they do about the American people. And again, they're afraid to be called controversial, racist, bigot, sex, misogynist, homophobic, the whole gambit. So what I try and do is not be politically correct. I try to give facts. Every fact that I give comes from published articles in the public domain, and that's where my comments come from as well. I do not use subjective emotional opinion. So that being said, we're in a very, speaking of election fraud, the powers that be says there's no evidence. What they're really saying, there's no transparency. I mean, we have given so much evidence. The state voting stops dead in its tracks, and and what do they say? Oh, come on, man. Well, what's their other line of defense? Liar, liar, pants on fire. If that doesn't work, they go nanner, nanner, nanner. I mean, this is literally, we're back in first grade here. We've given so much evidence of Donald Trump totals decreasing and Biden's increasing. It's on video from television. We've given evidence how they've bypassed state legislatures and changed laws. That's illegal. There's no transparency for anything, folks. It's about censoring. Evidence, facts, anything you can think of. I mean, we have videos of mail-in ballots showing up in suitcases. We have evidence and videos of USB sticks going in and out of machines, connecting to the internet. We have evidence of kicking GOP poll watchers out of the room and blockading the windows so you can't even visually see it, even from a distance. All this is illegal. We have thousands of witnesses and affidavits. But yet even our Supreme Court will not look at the evidence. So when we have evidence of dead people voting, same names voting, non-existent addresses, commercial, vacant addresses, every scenario you can think of, and every scenario was in favor of Joe Biden, so much evidence of foreign interference and anti-constitutional actions. It's not just about Donald Trump here. It's not deprogramming Trump people. It's calling people out who have paid for an agenda for personal gain and personal greed and addictions to power, money, and control. It's about a scripted plan that's unsustainable for America, that makes America illegitimate. It's not a left-right paradigm. It's the institution of an authoritarian, totalitarian, fascist, corrupt, tyrannical, communist insurrection where 200 million people don't even have $1,000 for an emergency. It's about a lack of respect, confidence, and trust in the system. It's about opportunity and future prosperity. It's about seeing an obvious consolidation of power, money, and control to the very few people at the top. It's obvious that merit for advancement does not supersede what group you're in. It's obvious it's not about equality, fairness, tolerance, and diversity. It's about divide and conquer strategies and redistributing wealth from the bottom 93% to the top 1% to 2%. It's obvious that they're rewarding tattletalers and snitches to sell out our fellow Americans. It's overwhelmingly obvious that we have so much election fraud, it's made America illegitimate. So that means we have no rule of law, we have no constitution. They want to take away free speech, they want to take away your right to protect yourself, and the only beneficiaries are going to be the few people at the top and foreign countries. So words like representation, freedom, liberty, justice, democracy, rule of law, protection, rights, restitution, cross them off your dictionary. In fact, they're probably going to make it illegal to say those words because dictator Biden, who isn't even a duly elected president, just say you can't say China virus. And that's one of the articles I have coming up. That's where we're heading. So when you have our DOJ, our FBI, our CIA being illegitimate, when work has been delegitimized, academia has been delegitimized, bankers, politicians, healthcare, everything's installed for the benefit of power, money, and control for the big guy and not the little guy. Lawyers, courts, judges, votes, elections, everything is in question. When you see our own military not using the word oath and duty and honor and code, when there's so much evidence of now that we're being run by foreign powers and all these anti-constitutional activities, what these people are doing is spitting on the graves of every combat soldier who gave their life for our country, over 1 million of them. Our military was supposed to be our last line of defense. Doesn't look like it is anymore, because the word investigation, the word evidence, the word fact, nothing means anything anymore. Speaking of the FBI, some new information that's come out, and I'm going to paraphrase. Again, this is all published articles in the public domain. Basically, they've disregarded evidence regarding Carter Page. He was not a traitor. They just did all this to spy on him and spy on the Trump campaign. And the Federal Bureau of Investigation has marshaled hundreds of agents from specialized squads and field offices across the country as its probe of the Capitol riot to move to a new phase, attempting to build conspiracy charges against expanding number of suspects. Remember Lavoy Finnegan? This is what they're doing, folks. There's no rule of law. There's no representation. They're literally trying to entrap the American people, building conspiracy charge claims. Remember when the FBI claimed jurisdiction over the Georgia ballots and took control of shredded ballots being analyzed in Georgia? And then what did they do? They sent it back to the shredder. Why is that? Is it because Georgia had a 93.67% vote adjudication, which is a 780% increase from 2016 and 446 increase from 2018? Or was it because it was different ballots, as per Jovan Pulitzer, one's for Republican, one for Democrat, where the Republican ballots were proven to be misaligned on the bullseye for proper allocation of votes? Come on, man. Oh, Rich, liar, liar, pants on fire. This is what America is now. In fact, we might as well stop using the name America, because it's what we are right now is too degrading and disrespectful to use the term America, because the people at the top levels who's supposed to have our back are all bought and paid for or blackmailed. We appreciate you being here, folks. I'm going to go to more news, finish that up, and go into gardening and off-grid tools that you'll need. Be right back. Welcome back to the broadcast, everyone. Rich Scheben from Montana sitting in for Guineith and Vincent today. And I think Vincent wants Guineith to relax, heal up, because when she calls in live from Australia, she's talking like at 2 o'clock in the morning. So, Guineith, if you're listening, we appreciate everything you do. We appreciate your patriotism, your willingness to be free, and your guts to say the truth. Okay, so I'm going to go back to more news, and I'm going to try really hard to minimize my comments, because some of this stuff is so surreal, so fake, so much propaganda, so ridiculous. It's you couldn't make this up if it was a comedy show / Twilight Zone episode. Okay, next. Joe Biden, America is a nation. He's saying this, Biden. America's a nation of morally deprived people who are less processed due to systemic racism. You can't even make up this crap. This is why he's a puppet, folks. His son was caught in his own PC doing underage girls. Biden and his family, how many articles are out there about Chinese money, Ukraine money, collusion, all these things that they said Trump did, the Bidens did. You can't even make this up. And he's calling you, the plurables, a nation of morally deprived people. This is a joke. Next. Labor unions that endorsed Biden in the past are now lashing out on him. Well, what do you expect, labor unions? He's a puppet. He's not for the people. He's for lack of prosperity, lack of freedom. He's to tear down America for a new world government. Next, Washington Post fact checker admits, and the word fact checker should always be in quotes, folks, admits they won't count Biden's false claims. Well, imagine my shock. Next, Biden transgender policy orders are forcing female troops to shower with biological men. We're going to have a new meeting and a new invention, and soap on a rope is going to come back. And who knows, you might be able to get it on Amazon. Next, more than half of Joe Biden's Twitter followers are fake. Were just created in January. Fake. Another word for that is phony. Another word for that is propaganda. Another word for that is hoaxes. Another word for that is lying. Next. I'm doing pretty good here. I can go into so many tangents, and I'm holding back, folks. I'm holding back. Texas sues Biden administration for opening up southern border as he sells out to China. Well, we all knew that was coming because we've given thousands of pieces of evidence prior to this article regarding his collusion and racketeering with China. Well, it's not going to be just Texas. Texas is toast. New Mexico's toast. Arizona's toast. California's toast. Well, California's already toast. But all those southern states are going to be toast. Next, YouTube demonetizes the Epic Times. Well, speaking for alternative media, we've all been demonetized for years, especially since being a supporter of Donald Trump. And when we're supporting Donald Trump, we're supporting the rule of law, the Constitution, freedom, liberty, justice. That's what we support, because that's what he was trying to represent. But now you're going to get robotics, automation, artificial intelligence, and lack of prosperity shoved down your throat. Congratulations, America. Next, Tucker Carlson says Democrats are preparing to enshrine fraud into the law so they say keep power forever. Look at H.R. 1. Look at all these bills. Look at all these executive orders that Biden's signing, a record by far. We've heard him on a hot mic saying, while he's signing an executive order, I don't know what I'm signing. He said, I don't know what I'm signing. That's called a puppet, folks. We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back to the broadcast, everybody. Rich Scheben from Montana, sitting in for Vincent Guineith today. And I'm going to go back to more news. Next article, Twitter refuses to take down child pornography because it doesn't violate policies, but they can censor anybody who speaks for the rule of law, for the Constitution, for objective facts. That includes even President Trump. Now, I try really hard to remember to say this disclaimer at least once per broadcast. I do not make up these articles When I give bullet points, I read articles, and I'll mention bullet points. Sometimes I'll mention titles. Sometimes I'll mention certain communications. I'll verify that with an article. I'll try to verify the authenticity before I mention it. Could some of these be psyops from intelligence agencies? I'm sure there's been a couple out there. I'm sure there has been. But everything I mention to you is published data in the public domain, okay, from credible sources. Because sometimes I know people are probably listening to these articles, listening to some of the bullet points. Sometimes I'll watch a half an hour video and I'll glean just a few sentences that's relevant in the interview, and I'll mention it. And I think a lot of people think I'm making some of this stuff up. No, this is where America has fallen to. This is why America is now illegitimate. This is why we're no longer America. Next, Democrat Party of Oregon refuses to condemn Antifa terrorists, or Blantifa, after they destroyed the party's headquarters. But who are they blaming? They're blaming Republicans instead. Again, disclaimer. Next, journalists use First Amendment to censor the First Amendment. And when you really think about this, that's what they're doing. They're using free speech to say you can't have any more free speech. You can't make this stuff up. Next, living in a microwave, how dangerous it is to live near a cell site. We've talked about electromagnetic radiation in detail. I've asked Dr. Norm Shealy questions about this. All I can do is present you with facts and evidence, and you have to make up your own mind, people. Next, student suicides forced Las Vegas schools to open. We have talked about the agenda in detail. The lockdowns, the crashing of the economy, the elimination of free market, the elimination of getting rid of cash, stopping patriotic, peaceful assembly, making people submissive to break their will, hiding people in their basements, basically installing politicians, eliminating the legitimacy of voting, especially by mail, everything being rigged, eliminating the Constitution, starving out the people, depopulation, eliminating free speech. We've talked about all this stuff in detail, but there's no accountability from the powers that be who do this stuff. Next, speaking of accountability, Dr. Shealy would love this article. Some physicians refuse to promote healthy lifestyle changes in order to avoid stressing cancer survivors. So you won't tell information about masks, about vaccines, about new therapies, about lifestyle changes because you're afraid to stress out your patients. Think about this. Just like during the break, they talked about this vaccine. Well, let me switch gears and talk about that for a moment, okay? Next article. Long-term mask use breeds microbes that infiltrate the lungs and contribute to advanced stage lung cancer. We've talked about how masks create hypoxia. We've talked about the Denmark study on how masks don't make things more efficacious for the people and does not have anything to do with transmission. We've talked about all these different studies. We've talked about how dentists are coming forward and gum disease is up by 50% because of the mouth bacteria. And Dr. Shealy confirmed all this stuff. And mouth bacteria is the most dangerous virulent bacteria in the body, which is associated to heart disease. It sounds like we're seeing physician soft genocide programs going on. It's kind of like an alibi, a plausible deniability. So you won't now physicians can refuse to promote healthy lifestyle changes or other therapeutics because they don't want to stress out their patients. Think about that, people. Think about that. Next article, Steve Hilton report, Dr. Anthony Fauci is directly responsible for funding the gain-of-function studies that resulted in coronavirus pandemic. Steve Hilton dropped bombshell. Dr. Fauci's institute commissioned research that produced the COVID-19 virus after Obama decommissioned the research. Next, 33 elderly people dead after first dose of coronavirus vaccine. Next, Florida man develops and dies from rare autoimmune disorder after receiving the Pfizer coronavirus vaccine. Next, Chinese doctor from Sinopharm coronavirus jab, most unsafe in the world, unquote, with 73 side effects. This doctor rescinded that because he got intimidated by the CCP. But this article came out before he rescinded what he said. Blackmail, threats, bribery. Everything's fake. Nothing's real. No consumer confidence. No trust. Next, Moderna and Pfizer's vaccines share a similar problem. They're unsafe for people with allergies. Well, our immune systems as Americans, as humans, have been degraded so much, especially Americans, because we went through the 80s and 90s going with a cold, a sniffle to the doctor, and we received, a 10, 14-day course of antibiotics. So our normal flora in our body is compromised. So think about how many allergies we have. Think about that. Next, U.S. pharma giant Merck. I used to work for Merck. Merck hired me as the first male job share. Okay? U.S. pharma giant Merck says COVID vaccines don't work. Let me repeat that, please. I'm not being condescending, maybe a little satirical. U.S. pharma giant Merck says COVID vaccines don't work. So can you imagine the people at Merck who came up with this study and this report? They're probably being threatened. They're probably being blackmailed. They're probably being bribed to rescind the article. Let's see what happens. But Merck just went up a notch in my book. Next. Oh, well, looky here. Merck's Gardasil vaccine crippled a young man, an ongoing medical tragedy that must be stopped. And I read the article. Lots of people are having neurological problems with vaccines, not just Merck's Gardasil. So these Gardasil has been out for many, many years. So think about how many people, if people are getting crippled later years after the vaccine, what's going to happen with this COVID vaccine? I just want you to think about that. Now, did Merck come out with that study saying that COVID vaccines don't work as a benevolent gesture? Or are they trying to cover their tracks with some good cop, bad cop, because all this Gardasil vaccine is coming out with crippling people? I can't answer that. But nothing would surprise me these days. Next, tax filings reveal that Biden's cancer charity spent millions on salaries and zero on research, defrauding the public. That's basically what Big Pharma does in a way, folks. They put a lot more money into PR and ads than they do into R&D, research and development. You got to remember the powers that be are ignoring the Geneva Convention, ignoring the Nuremberg Code, ignoring doctors who are giving this, ignoring the Hippocratic Oath. A vaccine means specifically prepared to give an antigen to a person to provide immunity. This mRNA vaccine, so they call it vaccines, put it in quotes to people, is not what the true vaccine means. And I read this because when you fast track it, it gives them more liability immunity. It enables them. It protects them more because they can come out with less human studies and they can say, well, this is more in vitro proven than in vivo, which means more test tube than in real life. So what they're doing is they're setting themselves up for liability immunity. And Big Pharma, next article, is liable for vaccine deaths. I think, who's that lawyer? Bob, I can't remember his name. But I'll be honest with you, I see, we've talked about this in great detail. When you enable companies, when you demand no protection rights or restitution on the rule of law for people who have been targeted, you create no checks to runaway power. We've talked about this. And it enables and protects these corrupt companies and industries and gives them more liability immunity. So you're destroying capitalism and forcing fraud, illegitimacy, and fascism while creating more wealth and equality. And when you get rid of the rule of law, you exchange them with precedents. So what we've done is we've given free lunch to big corporations, especially big pharma, and they have all the wealth redistribution going to them, all the tax loopholes going to them, special asset ownership privileges going to them, while they give us back divide and conquer strategies. So what we've done is we've allowed our people in power to sell certain privileges to the highest bidder, which takes away our freedoms, liberty, health, and ability to be happy. So we're allowing ourselves to poison us against ourselves while the powers that be are using biology, chemicals, technology, and psychology and destroying the American dream. Okay, next article. Germany prepares for electricity rationing to stabilize green power grid. Next article, Biden allows Chinese company to meddle with the U.S. power grid. People, if you can't connect the dots to see what's coming, then you're dead. You're brain dead. You're intellectually lazy. And I'm not trying to be harsh. I'm just being factual here. The powers that be, a few people have sold out America to the highest bidder. And that includes foreign domination of other countries like China. I'll be right back after the break, folks. Welcome back to the broadcast, everybody. Rich Scheben. Hey, before I go into gardening and off-grid living and things like that, I want to just put an exclamation point, and I was going to go into more detail on this particular study and report by a Dr. Vollmer, who's a naturopathic medicine out of Canada, out of Toronto, and she basically found that COVID-19 test does not actually test for COVID-19. That's right. So she found that the PCR test, I'm going to just mention a couple highlights. I was going to go into more detail. I don't have time. And she talks about the PCR testing protocol developed by the World Health Organization to detect COVID-19 actually tests for chromosome 8, which is present in all humans. So she basically says we are the virus. And I'm just going to go through. She talks about what a scam it is, false positive test. She talks about variances. She talks about DNA and the primer and all this stuff. I just don't have the time to go through that. I'm mentioning this so you can look up this article and read that she says this is all a scam. In other words, you've been played, you've been conned. Okay? She talks about how the cycles and the variances can be changed and to make anybody be positive, anybody be negative, depending on how they turn it up. And so basically, all these amplifications need to be looked at, and that's what she did. And the test protocol, a primer is amplified, is set arbitrarily. Am I clear? And can be set arbitrarily. I hope I'm clear, depending on the needs of the state. So she basically says this is organized crime. And by the way, China is now pushing anal swabs for COVID testing. I did not say that for effect. I did not say that to wake you up. There's articles coming out on this now. So now you have to ask yourself, where do you want to put your diaper? On your face or on your butt? Seriously, this is where we are. You guys need to read this article. I don't have time to go through it in more detail. I was going to, but I'm just not going to have time. So let me talk about the importance of gardening, folks. As I mentioned yesterday very briefly, I call it a recreational, necessity. I talk about the importance of getting heirloom, open-pollinated seeds versus these hybrid sterile-type seeds. Now, there's a lot more of the hybrid sterile-type seeds out there because they're all manufactured by the Monsantos of the world because they don't want self-sufficiency. They don't want you to have nutrition. They want you to go to the grocery store so they can spray their chemicals like chlorprofam on potatoes so it slows budding shoots and rot so it stays on the shelf longer. They want their food radiated. And a lot of these federal laws protect these farmers because now today's farmers are big corporations. There's hardly any mom and pops left. So the process is designed to destroy nutrition and vitamins. You can go to the grocery store and you can get Salmonella, E. coli, Listeria. You can go to restaurants, get the same thing, which causes sickness and health. Never mind GMO food. We've talked about GMO many times. And I've read many articles where GMO foods cause cancer, organ failure, and changes your DNA. What else changes your DNA? Some of these new vaccines? 5G? Can't you see that your immune system is being attacked from every angle, folks? So the powers that be create a system of food production that eliminates all accountability. Just like this one article that I mentioned where physicians are designed to literally not promote healthy lifestyle changes because now they're saying it stresses you out. Same thing with HIPAA regulations. HIPAA is designed to protect the establishment. Less talk about it, less accountability about it. That's how that works. So you got to think about growing your own food. You got to think about being self-sufficient. You got to think about organic wide row raised bed gardening, at least 8 inches above the ground. You got to think about making your own compost, aka soil. Like I have goats, I have chickens, and I use all that straw saturated in their poop. I put it in a compost pile. I throw eggshells in there, tomato, carrot tops, you name it, anything that's organic goes in my compost pile. And then I harvest it in the fall, put it in my garden. The winter cools it down, and I got new soil. So I'm a big proponent of raised beds because raised beds will warm the temperature of the soil sooner in the spring, and it keeps the soil warmer into the fall. So for generation, root growth, it makes it more productive. And when I put my compost in there, or whatever fertilizer that's organic I use, it doesn't leach out all over the whole ground. It stays in the raised beds. So I don't have to use as much nutrients or vitamins, and it takes less moisture when I water the garden versus having a regular garden plot, if that makes any sense. I'll be right back. We'll talk more in detail about gardening when I get back, folks. We appreciate you being here, and we'll see you after the top of the hour break. Welcome back to the broadcast, everybody. Hour number 2, and this is Rich Scheben from Montana, broadcasting from Northwest Montana, and the reason why I'm here is because Guineith Isaacs had a horseback riding accident. And for those of you who want to wish her well, you can contact Vincent at instructor@usaprepares.com. That's instructor@usaprepares.com. And before the break, I was getting into talking about gardening because you heard me many times talk about food, water, shelter, and energy, and doing as much of that as you can and being as self-sufficient as you can. So I'm just going to start rattling off more information, more things that I've discovered and learned and read about over the years. And for those of you who live in urban, suburban America, those of you who buy land that were old pastures, you got to watch out for a lot of the poisons, from heavy metals in the soil to mechanical and chemical stuff in the pastures like glyphosate. It destroys the nutrients. You need nutrients. That's where when you eat all these pretty vegetables, you're not getting nutrients from necessarily the pretty vegetables. You need the nutrients in the soil to be transferred to these pretty vegetables for you to get the benefits, the health benefits. And when you're in urban, suburban areas, a lot of your watering, just like going to a restaurant, and I go to restaurants now and then, don't get me wrong, but municipal water has fluoride, has chlorine, has pharmaceutical drugs, has many different chemicals and poisons in it. So you got to think about all that stuff. You got to think about organic. You got to think about recycling. That's why I talk about composting, because nothing goes to waste. Eggshells, radish tops, carrot tops, banana peels, coffee grounds, tomato stems, everything that we don't give to the dogs, the goats, or the chickens, which those three eat a lot of different stuff, trust me, goes into the compost. We are probably more green living this way than 99.9% of Americans in the lower 48. I mean, I even, when we take a bath, we literally use the gray water to reflush the toilet with a bucket, because I live in a dry log cabin. So everything is done kind of from scratch. We relearn the old 19th century skills, but we dovetail them with 21st century technology. And that's when hopefully I'll have time to talk about living with the solar array and living off grid. So going back to, let's talk about greenhouses for a moment. I'm looking out my window here. Now, I have a polycarbonate greenhouse. It was professionally built. It cost a few $1,000s. It cost me like about $6,000. It's probably close to double that now. And I built another greenhouse, which I called the old jalopy. It's almost 40 feet long, and I put a ridge pole on it, and then I put cattle panels over it, and I put a little wire. You don't need a lot of wire because wire has a memory, okay? So when you bend those cattle panels, they stay put. So I put 16-foot long cattle panels over a ridge pole, and then I purchased online UV-treated plastic. It's got to be UV-treated or else it won't last. The sun will eat it up. So I have kind of an upside-down U. See, I have, and then I put my fence around that. I put my raised bed gardens before I did my fencing, so I could access more things. Now, after I did have fencing up, did I do some expansion in the garden? Yes. But my initial plans, I did the fencing last, because I have tons of deer. I got occasional bear, actually a lot of bear, moose, elk come through. If I didn't have a 10-foot fence, I wouldn't have a garden. Okay? That's just the way it goes. And I want to reiterate the importance of heirloom and open pollinated seeds. Do not buy the Monsanto kind of seeds. Don't buy those sterile seeds, because if the crapper hits the fan, you want to be able to have self-propagation. Like my spinach, okay? I have like half-inch spinach already coming up, okay, that has germinated from late fall and even through the winter, because we're not even having winters anymore. I got like only in some areas, not on my southern slopes, I got maybe 1/8 of an inch of snow, maybe. I mean, last year we didn't have a winter. This year we've had so much rain. We've had highs in the 30s and 40s. It's crazy. I mean, we're not even having winter anymore. This is insane. So think about heirloom seeds. Go to, I'm going to give you 3 sources, seedsofchange.com. Now, I haven't verified if they're still in business. You're going to have to do that. Seedsofchange.com. Then there's Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds. I know they're still in business, and that's www.rareseeds.com. Rareseeds.com. And then Native Seed Search, which is nativeseeds.org. So those are 3 sources that I've used in the past. You're going to have to verify to see if they're still in business, because the powers that be want to eliminate self-sufficiency. They want to put so many different regulations in there that makes you sell out where you have no choice. So you need to think heirloom. Think about using, like, even a second-year carrot. And I didn't know all this. I either read it, I researched, or I asked people questions. That's how you learn, right? So like a second-year carrot, you let go to seed, and then you sprinkle it all over your garden. You got volunteer carrots all over the place. It works. Okay, a lot of what I grow, I just let self-seed, especially the leafy greens. I have some heirloom lettuces that I do the same thing. They just pop up. And I make sure that it has the ability to get the seed to a certain maturity so it germinates, and it works wonderful. As far as tomatoes, for those of you who are into tomatoes, I use a Brandywine, which is an heirloom tomato. It's probably one of the longest to mature. People say, why do you use a Brandywine tomato? Because Montana's got shorter growing seasons. With a greenhouse, you get like 2-3 weeks on each side of your growing season. I've picked tomatoes in November. It's rare, but I've picked them. And I start everything from seed inside my cabin, right next to the wood stove, and as soon as they germinate, I put them in the solarium where it's heated with convection from the cabin, and they get full sun. And it's facing southeast. So the Brandywine tomato is a huge tomato. Sometimes I've picked tomatoes where it's double the size of my fist. Okay? That's a pretty big tomato. And when you, just a little hint, I'm kind of going all over the place here. I want to give you as much information as possible. When you start your starts, when you germinate your seeds, and then you put them by a windowsill, on a southern slope where there's a window, or a solarium, or a heated greenhouse, you got to make sure you harden them for at least 10 days. So you take them in the beginning of the morning when frost has subsided, put them outside, and leave them out there until the evening. And you bring them in and out for 10 days, and that hardens the little baby plants. So a lot of people also measure their soil pH. It's not a bad idea. I've done it once or twice. I just know what kind of organic stuff, whether it be fertilizer or what I make here. It could be your, potash, phosphate, calcium. I mean, there's so much stuff that you could add to your garden, and it depends also on is it in the greenhouse? Is it outside? What vegetables you're putting in that spot? You have to do all the research and reading and ask the questions to find out, because you want to concentrate on plants that you consume that are immune stimulants, that fight cancer, tumors, that create a homeostasis in the body. Okay? Like broccoli and cabbages and the Brussels sprouts, the asparagus, the garlic, the onions, the peppers, the horseradish, all this stuff. And I grow most of the stuff here. Horseradish in Montana grows phenomenally well. There's so many things that you could do. And as far as teaching kids, I give tons of tours, whether it be for the garden or edible medicinal plants. What are we teaching our kids today? We're teaching them to push buttons, manage paper, and be politically correct. Don't offend somebody, but we're not teaching them how to live. We're not giving them skill sets. Teach them how to affect your immune system in a positive way. Think about how many people you know who are taking pharmaceutical drugs for inflammation, circulation, allergies, infection, detoxification, cancer, and tumors, all related to the immune system. Think about the glyphosate that I just talked about. That's the main ingredient in Monsanto's Roundup. I know they don't go by Monsanto anymore because Bayer bought them out. But it's linked to so many problems, and I mean glyphosate. Some of the problems, just off the top of my head, are stomach and bowel problems, indigestion, ulcers, colitis, gluten intolerance, sleeplessness, lethargy, depression, Crohn's disease, allergies, obesity, infertility, liver disease, renal failure, autism, Alzheimer's, endocrine disruptions. And the World Health Organization, not that long ago, announced that glyphosate was a carcinogen. And they're not your buddies. So you got to think about all this in your... to affect your immune system in a positive way. Now, let me go back to my examples on how I practice what I preach, and I tell you to regarding certain things. Think basics: food, water, shelter, and energy. Now, when you think about shelter, think about low interest. Think about not defaulting on your loan. Think about having privacy. Think about end of road. Think about having a garden. Think about raising animals, maybe hunting and fishing. Think about all this stuff. When it comes to energy, think about off-grid. Think about the ill effects and the lack of privacy from smart meters, where they can literally, if you don't take a vaccine or do what they say, they can shut off your power and your water with a smart meter by pushing a button in their home office. Think about all this stuff, building skill sets, self-sufficiency. Think about a lifestyle, because this really is a lifestyle. Now I'm going to go into alternative. Before I go into that, maybe I should talk a little bit, since I was talking about gardening, I want to mention a couple things regarding edible and medicinal plants. I want you to think about toxicity. I want you to think about palatability. I want you to think about, could it be an emetic, a laxative? Does it affect your kidney or your liver? You got to think about all this stuff, because when people say that a child can go out and pick edible and medicinal plants, no. You have to know what you're doing. You have to read and research. To take experience, because it could be dangerous. I'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. Rich Scheben sitting in for Vince and Guineith. And I'm going to mention a few things, that, as I did start before the break, about edible medicinal plants. You better know what you're doing. Okay, you just don't go out in your backyard or go out in the woods and pick stuff. It's very, very dangerous. Is it a disclaimer? Yes. Is it truth? Yes. So I'm just going to talk about some of the things that I do regarding that. Maybe I'll mention a few plants that I pick and I give tours on. I have about probably 70 edible medicinal plants just on my property alone. I probably have 10 wild berries. I have wild strawberries, raspberries, Oregon grape, currant gooseberries, service berries, choke cherries, and my service berries and choke cherries I actually cultivate in a fence around my garden area. So it's basically emergency food, and it really attracts the bird because I'm really into ornithology. It's all about nature. Hawthorn berries, kinnikinnick berries, buffalo berry, and that's just here. That's just right here in the valley. If you go up in the woods, you can get huckleberry and more stuff as well. I like to eat a lot of things raw because that keeps the enzymes intact, because once you cook foods over 130 degrees Fahrenheit, you destroy the nutrition, the enzymes, which are so important. I'll harvest asparagus wild, even though I grow it in my garden. It's a huge immune stimulant. It's a diuretic. It reduces gout and other arthritic conditions. And because it's an immune stimulant, it fights cancers and tumors. I harvest the inner bark of birch, which reduces inflammation and pain. And you get the benefit of butylene and butylenic acid, which fights tumors and cancer, and it's a blood and liver cleanser as well. And it's good, improves your pancreatic functions. And I usually do that when I harvest chaga, which is a wild mushroom in the middle of winter. I will harvest it because that's when it's the strongest. I also harvest burdock. It's very healing. It's the root is used as food. It's a blood purification. It's an anti-inflammatory. It eliminates or reduces uric acid. There's so much. I mean, I could do 5 shows on this. Dandelion. For those of you who harvest dandelion, it's got vitamin A and vitamin C. It's a great additive to your salad. The thing is, and here's another disclaimer, whether it be your property, a neighbor's property, a farm, a buffer zone, along a roadside, you need to do your due diligence. You need to make sure that there hasn't been spray or poison of any kind in that area. And it's very important you do that. Fireweed. I let fireweed grow wild in my garden. I cut it, and even in my greenhouse. When it starts to seed, it's a very thick seed. I wonder if you can almost weave it into some type of clothing. It's so thick and beautiful. It's almost like silk. But fireweed is very edible. And you can eat the flowers, you can eat the leaves, the roots, and I often harvest young fireweed and eat it like poor man's asparagus when it starts shooting up, and I'll put the leaves in my salad as well. I also, for those of you who have a garden, I remember this from New York, lamb's quarter. It has pig's ears. It's got like 5 different names, okay? A lot of it's slang, but I add it to salads all the time. Just don't add the seeds because that's semi-toxic. It's got vitamin C. It's got calcium. It's very healthy, very delicious. I also harvest purslane out of the garden, red clover. I got red clover, especially late summer, early fall. It fights cancers and tumors. It's an anti-inflammatory. There's so many. I just don't have the time to talk about it all. Wild violet. It's hard to harvest it because it's so beautiful, but you can eat everything. I don't think there's anything wild in the violet family that is not edible, just so you know. Sheep sorrel. Okay, it's like an arrow-leafed shaped leaf. It's got vitamin A and C. It's part of the ASEAC formula with burdock. And it's considered mostly an herb, but it's a leaf that you can fight the immune system with. I also harvest strawberry or raspberry blight, depending on which book you look at. It's related to spinach, and you can eat it in small quantities, add it to salad. It's got vitamin B, C, iron, calcium. It fights cancers and tumors. When I'm out in the woods hunting, I'm often picking Guineith Oregon grape. Guineith is, I live here in the Tobacco Valley. The Indians used to make that part of their tobacco concoction. And it's got a red berry that's very pithy, but it's very edible. It's not at the top of people's list for edibility, but it'll save your life. I eat oxeye daisy, raw or cooked. Welcome back, everybody. As usual, as the broadcast winds down, I end up talking faster and making more shortcuts. I apologize for that, but there's so many things to talk about, whether it be current news, off-grid living, finance, economics, political correctness. It's just overwhelming, and I almost have to pick and choose and shortcut my shortcuts to get out enough information for you guys. I'm going to talk a little bit about energy. The reason is because we need to all get away from this politically correct mentality, this follower, cookie-cutter, subdivision theory. Why do you think the CPI is exempt from food and energy measurements? There's a reason for that. 50, all this talk about, electric cars, electric this, electric that, it's cleaner. Well, half of our electricity comes from coal. What do you think Joe Biden's doing to coal? How about EPA regulations? Are they going to favor the little guy? No. The pipeline just got canceled. Who's that going to hurt? The big guy or the little guy? I don't have to answer this because you guys know the answer. China, as per Biden, now has part of our grid control. What do you think is going to happen to access, to prices? You know the information. You got to start thinking outside the box and not just talk outside the box, but live outside the box because options are not going to be there. So I love wood heat. I bought enough land that I can harvest enough wood, and it's warmer. It's more efficient, has better BTUs. It just feels better, and I get to do a little exercise and a little elbow grease by harvesting firewood on my own property. And if you're close to government property like National Forest Service, that's another way to go, but it's totally up to you. And I use, I'm going to talk about my equipment. I use 6-volt batteries. I wire them together, so they're T105s. They're the simplest, cheapest battery out there. $1,500, folks, and I get minimum 8 years of voltage and amperage storage for $1,500. I've spent $1,500 on a weekend. This isn't hard. You just have to do a little reading and research. And where I get how I do this is I have 225 amp hours. So each battery is wired in 3 strings of 4. So that's how you get the unit of measure of amp hours. 225 times 3 is 675 amp hours. So I really have kind of a small system compared to most people. I have a 110 volt inverter charger. And I got to say, I started with no skills on this. I had no skills, no information about alternative energy. I had to do my own reading and research. And I saw where things are going. I saw that people weren't going to get jobs based on hard work, effort, proven results, and qualifications, but political correctness and what group you're in. I saw laws being in favor of the big guy and not helping out the little guy. I see the powers that be wanting depopulation, eliminating opportunities and options. So I have slowly moved towards more of a self-sufficient lifestyle. Now, think about what happened in Hurricane Katrina. And there's been many, whether it be volcanoes blowing up, it doesn't matter. Think about all the people that were left without food, water, and shelter and plans because of Mother Nature. Stuff happens. And it could be the powers that be eliminate commerce, crash the economy, which they've been trying to do for a few years now. So you got to think about survival mode. You got to think about uncontaminated food, water. You got to think about self-defense. You got to think about getting away from the masses of people. You got to think about eliminating smart businesses or anything smart meters, okay? Anything smart, exchange that for the word spy. If you have a smart meter on your house, the powers that be can shut down your power and water as quickly as you can snap your fingers. So think about all the things you need for alternative energy tools. Batteries, solar panels, solar controller, a trimetric, a DC disconnector, an inverter charger, and a generator all wired in unison. That's how I do it. Now I want you to think about the benefits of the cost. Even if you're using gasoline in a generator and you need to supplement, it's still so much cheaper than being on the grid. Not just bringing your power to you, but they charge you with a monthly fee on top of it. And then they can shut you down with that smart meter. Think about the proper cable sizing that connects, meaning the diameter and the length, because you want to consider that for safety and efficient operation. So the larger diameter cables, in other words, the smaller AWG number, will have less voltage drop, and it's also more efficient for transferring power to and from the batteries. Because if your cable is undersized where the diameter is too small, you can have overheating, you can have fire danger, and you got to think about all that. You got to think of the diameter, the cable length, all that has to be a consideration. Now, there's many different types of batteries today. I use a lead-acid battery, okay, and that's probably the most popular, but they got silicon salts, they got lithium batteries, steel batteries, AGM batteries. So I've been off-grid for over 13 years, and my stuff is so simple but so obsolete, but it works. And you got to think of what works best for you. So most people recognize lead-acid battery because it's their car battery or the pickup truck battery. Well, these vehicles are designed to supply large amounts of electricity in short bursts. In other words, your car battery can supply a certain amount of current in a short amount of time if the battery is shallow cycled. I use deep cycled. Off-grid people use deep cycle when they're talking lead-acid battery. So that type of battery is what I use for my alternative energy storage, storing volts, storing amps. So the deep cycle battery is not meant to supply a large amount of amps in a short period of time, but instead to supply a moderate amount of amps for a long period of time. And that's what most off-grid power sources uses. Now, again, you could use silicon salt. Silicon salt is a Chinese battery. It's got a lot of advantages. It's probably a longer shelf life. It's new. It can handle below freezing temperatures without having to warm them up. You don't have to. It's a sealed battery, so you don't have to do any maintenance. It's all up to you there's AGM batteries, there's gel cell batteries. They're like lead-acid batteries, except the electrolyte is typically not a liquid. There's nickel-iron batteries, which is a high-energy density battery. And sometimes they have lifetime guarantees, but they can be challenging to use in cool temperatures like the Northern Rockies here in Montana, because the battery typically needs to be in temperatures no lower than 45 degrees Fahrenheit. Even though my battery room is insulated, I make sure that, I don't have to worry about it getting below 45 degrees. And batteries work probably most optimum around 70, 77 degrees. So I'm just trying to give as much information as possible. I know people who live with industrial-sized batteries that have typically a 20-year shelf life, but they cost over $1,000 each. One example is called the L16s, and they're probably one of the smallest of the industrial-sized batteries. But my little T105s, my Trojan 105s, cost me $1,500 for a minimum 8-year shelf life. So if I break it down, think about that. It's like $13 a month if it lasts, say, 10 years. That's why I said minimum 8 years. It works. It's easy. So most people typically used non-sealed lead-acid batteries because it's not as hard as you think for their alternative power. And I mean that there's needs for maintenance, but some people check the electrolytes, the water levels. I do that about once a month, not so much in the winter because I don't use the electrolytes as much, maybe every 2 months in the winter. Use distilled water and into each cell. Some people take specific gravity readings with a hydrometer. I've done that years ago, but I've been living off-grid for so long, I don't need to do it. Plus, batteries are so cheap. So these hydrometers, they measure specific gravity, which is basically a measurement of density of a liquid. I don't feel the need to do that because I've been doing this for so long. So if you can keep your battery room in that mid-70s range, and you don't have to, it's just that's when they work the best. So at higher temperatures, they'll outperform their ratings, but they're also going to have a shorter shelf life. So in the wintertime, my batteries have an ambient temperature of about 40 degrees in my room, which means they lose probably in that 10 to 20% range of their capacity to store electrical energy. But I don't really care because I don't let my battery health to be filled less than 80%. Once in a while it does, but I try to turn on my generator when it gets below 80% or at 80%. So I keep my energy capacity strong. My batteries will perform better in the warm temperatures, but again, have a shorter shelf life, okay, in cooler temperatures. And it's kind of a good trade-off. You got to decide what appliances you're going to use, how rugged you want to live. Everybody does it different. I've been to 200 off-grid homes, and I'm being conservative with that number. Before, during, and after I lived off-grid. Everybody does it different. They do it according to their skill sets, their ability and willingness to live rugged, their capital resources. Everybody does it different. So, now there couldn't be exceptions in cold weather. If you're below 32 degrees, which happens, if they're deeply discharged, and the electrolyte becomes mostly water, and then it could freeze, breaking the casings and the plates. So you want to try to make sure that your batteries are full, have full storage capacity when it gets really cold, maybe even bring in a heater into that room, okay? A battery bank needs to get as close to full charge every 7 to 8 days when you're talking about these lead-acid batteries. So you can go a few days without having them be charged if you have cloudy days, which happens in winter here in Montana, especially for all northern climates and higher elevations. So I recommend that a battery temperature sensor option be installed on your inverter. It's just a simple thing, connects to your battery, connects to your inverter. It's basically a sensor that sits between the batteries while the port's plugged into your inverter. And that sensor will extend battery life a little bit by preventing overcharging in warm temperatures and undercharging in cold temperatures. Now, you don't have to do all the things, have all these different little systems. You can also buy an Outback system, Outback, and this has all the tools I just mentioned basically combined. So there's different ways. In the 13 years since I've been off-grid, there's been so many new innovations. I can see I'm running out of time. I have one more segment left, folks. I'll try to give as much information. Get well soon from your horseback riding accident. I want to thank Jason again for engineering the broadcast from Minnesota. I want to thank Vince Finelli for allowing me to exercise my First Amendment rights. So I'm going to go back to my tools again regarding what I use. And I was talking about, I want to be a little more specific regarding how I try not to get below 80% of full at any time in my battery bank. And it just takes a little diligence and a little easy math to keep my shelf life strong on my batteries. So I'll take my 675 amp hours, which I told you how I get to that conclusion, of my system, and I multiply that times 0.20 because I don't want to get below 80%. That gives me a total of 135 amps. So I have a trimetric, which counts up from 0, so I try not to go over 135 amps during that 7 or 8 day period. It's not that difficult. And the trimeter is a great tool because it has automated readings, like how many days since I fully charged the batteries, how many days since they were equalized, minimum and maximum battery voltage. It can reset my trimeter battery system for different settings. Like, for example, I like to keep during that winter period, 8 months of the year, I don't even pay attention. But during the winter period, I do my charge set points at my voltage at 29.6, and I do my amps at 13. So the voltage has to go up to 29.6 or higher, and my amperage, which declines, has to get below 13%. Okay, that's my charge set points for the winter. Okay, and then I also have a solar controller. Pardon me giving all this information, folks. I want to give you as much information as possible so you can do your own reading and research and have a base. A solar controller is really important because the purpose of the solar controller is so that I can charge my batteries from the sun and at the same time prevent batteries from overcharging. I can even equalize my battery bank, which means when I say equalize, so I can get to 30 volts over a certain period of a few hours, and that kind of cooks my batteries, which is necessary every 1 to 3 months, depending on who you talk to and what you read. I also have an inverter charger. Okay, it's one machine together. Okay, and it's a tool that converts my AC power when I'm using my AC generator, and it goes through the inverter charger and stores it as DC power in my batteries. So if I want that stored DC power to go into my cabin, it goes through the inverter charger and back into my cabin, so I can transfer and invert it from AC to DC depending on the situation. The inverter also is a built-in charger, and it has a 3-stage charging process, and I can go into that for about 10 minutes. I don't have the time. So you need to be aware that this is a tool. All these are tools that have multiple sources, multiple benefits, and that's where, again, your reading and research comes in. I also have a DC disconnect and an overcurrent protection in its simplest definition, and basically it isolates the batteries and protects the solar controller. So fuses and other disconnects must be sized to protect the wiring system, and National Electric Code gives you all that information. And I also have a generator. Now, I use a 7,000-watt generator that has a 240-volt hookup. I don't have it in my cabin. I just have 120. I did not feel the need to wire my cabin for a 240, especially when I have a generator that's that big. I didn't need a 7,000-watt generator. It was on sale. I bought it, and I could probably get away with much less. And it all depends, again, on how you want to live. So I just don't feel the need to go with a big generator. I have one, but if I ever bought a new one, I'd probably downsize it big time. And people ask me, well, do you have a propane generator? Do you have a diesel generator? Do you use this? I don't. The reason why I use gas is because it's readily accessible, and I use non-ethanol fuel, which is the best premium gas grade you can get, and I use it for all my tools. And that's why I chose gas, because I wanted to have one fuel that fits all. But that's just me. You got to do it your way. So, my generator's gasoline, my chainsaw, my wood splitter, my UTV, which is basically a side-by-side ATV, my pickup truck. So I can use gas for everything, for all my major tools for survival. And, of course, there's solar. Of course, there's hydro. Hydro is probably the best. But you got to have permits. You got to have a certain amount of water flow at a certain distance and a certain fall. So you, again, have to look into all this stuff. Now, just remember that the majority of the middle-class Americans spend their disposable income on food, energy, and entertainment and recreation. It's time to tweak those a little bit. We have to start thinking outside the box. I talked about the soaring home prices because there's so many articles of that these days and all the variables that revolve around it. The reason why home prices are soaring is because people are leaving urban, suburban America. And I get it.